She was also BC's Attorney General and Minister of Justice. So evidently she's been involved in many different layers of government throughout her career. However, given her role as Attorney General and the Minister of Justice was to make sure the government's conduct their affairs in a legal way, this makes her public criticisms about the government's actions to the pandemic essential and quite important, given at one point it was her job to exercise political judgment and uphold the rule of law by providing independent, nonpartisan legal advice. And do you want to add anything to that, Suzanne?
Yeah, the role of the Attorney General is an interesting one. And I do feel, thank you, Laska, by the way, and thank you, Philip, and welcome everybody. Really a pleasure to be here with you again. There may be Q&A for me, but I've got Q&A back to you again. So because there's a lot of things I don't know. I never did labor law, and I am not an expert in labor matters. And I just like to get a better sense of some of the challenges that you're facing, but we'll come back to that in a moment. In terms of the Attorney General is a partisan member of cabinet, so I don't want to lose sight of that. But at the same time, you do have a nonpartisan role, which is to make sure that government conducts itself in a legal manner. So for today's news about the trucker convoy is really, really good news. I've got to say, it feels like the pendulum is swinging ever so slightly back in favor of those people who think that civil liberties are important. And it is interesting because the Attorney General of Canada will have had to give his advice that declaration of a state of emergency was legal. Now he got turfed a few months ago. I don't know if it's related to this or not, but the Attorney General, if something were to have happened, let's just take something that did not happen when I was there, and I was there with Premier Christy Clark. If the Premier had wanted to do something which, in my judgment, was illegal, I have two things that I can do. One is try and talk her out of it, or the second is resign. That's how serious the role of the Attorney General is. And you can tell from the fact I didn't resign that there were never any things. Once in a while, premiers get a little itchy feet over criminal prosecutions that don't go well and things like that. And you just have to say, that's the way the system works. And then any smart premier will accept that. If I had been there during the time of COVID, would I have done everything perfectly? I don't know, because I think it would have been quite difficult, especially at the beginning when everybody was just going completely crazy. Certainly, as time has gone on, it's very, very clear. And as more information has come forward, it's very clear that the authorities were not acting. Either they were blind to the good information, or they ignored the good information, or they picked and chose amongst information, because I think they made a lot of mistakes. And those are now starting to manifest themselves in these recent judgments that we've had. The Purolator decision is, as you know, I think I've now had 142,000 views of my tweet on that decision, wow, which is a lot of interest. That, and Laska, I'll let you decide what you want to talk about, but that was, to me, a real game changer. And then this truckers convoy case today that came out today, well, social media was humming on all the ramifications of that. And I think that too is a game changer. I feel optimistic now. I'm not sure about the difficulty that so many of you are facing in terms of having been fired, not having your income. Will you get that back again? Now you're facing these class action lawsuits, which there's absolutely no guaranteed conclusion of them. It's been very, very, very difficult for you. And the way out of that is not clear. You have to keep forging ahead, which is what you're doing. But boy, I'd sure like to see that pendulum swinging the other direction as well, because you've just been fighting so hard for a long, long time. I hope that soon that it will have some impact, but it's been hard. I can see that it must have been extremely difficult for you. And I really do feel for you, because I think all of you here who lost your jobs one way or another were treated very, very badly. I think it was wrong. And I think what the system did was wrong. What the government did was completely wrong. So Laska, back to you. You can tell us how you want. Tell me how you'd like to talk about this.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love just hearing your passion behind everything you're saying. And I think it's refreshing for a lot of people, just given your role in government, hearing how you were quite opposed and have very different views of how things were handled. And like you said, it's always different when you're in the situation. But even like, you know, you and I had a kind of a brief call earlier in the week, and I even said to you, like, what's the situation with the current Attorney General? I said, you know, Nikki Sharma, is it too late for her to say anything? Like, why have they not stepped in to say something? Like, why are they silent on the issue? And it doesn't sound like it could be too late. It sounds like now might be a time to say something, but there's been nothing, radio silence on that side of things.
Well, let's go to the Purolator case, which really was a standout decision. And I'll just talk about it in a little bit of detail, if you don't mind, because I don't know if everyone will know about it. So this was a Purolator Canada case under the Canadian Labour Board, Canada Labour Board. And it was an arbitration. It did take place here in British Columbia with a British Columbia arbitrator whose name is Nicholas Glass. And so what Purolator did is it fired or laid off people from about the time you would have probably expected, which is the late fall of 2021, up until June of 2022, when they looked at the issue again, but they did not change their minds. And it was only until about May of 2023 that they changed their minds and brought their people back again. And what arbitrator Glass did was he did two things. One is he actually listened to really good evidence, which has not happened. And maybe you can tell me in a few minutes why the unions are not bringing forward that quality of evidence. But the Teamsters brought in really good evidence. They brought in a very a very good expert who was very clear that after a few months, the difference between an unvaccinated person and a vaccinated person is no different. There's no difference in risk. He heard that evidence from the expert. He also heard how many of the other entities, not the BC government, but other governments, other health authorities had decided the same thing, which is that the strength of the vaccines, if you like, wanes quite quickly over time, so that after a number of months, again, there's no difference in transmission and there's no difference in between a vaccinated person and unvaccinated person. So he heard that evidence. He applied it, and he said that Purolator should, by June of 2022, a year and a half ago now, that was the time they should have lifted their prohibition against these workers coming on. And because they didn't, he says that Purolator owes them compensation from that time, not the whole time they were off, but from June of 2022 up until May of 2023. I think it's about 10 months. So it's going to be pretty expensive for Purolator to figure that one out. So not only did he order the compensation, he made that crucial finding about the transmission and infection, and there's no difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated. But the other thing he did, which I just found so interesting, was he looked at the language that Dr. Bonnie Henry and Minister Adrian Dix have been using, and he said that it was wholly inconsistent with all the other information out there. In other words, he says they're wrong. So here's the analysis. For those of you who are the healthcare workers, I don't know how much, I haven't got figured, let's just deal with the healthcare workers first. For those of you who are healthcare workers who are still not permitted to go back to work, that is because of the order of Dr. Bonnie Henry. Dr. Bonnie Henry can only make an order which relies on health considerations. If her health considerations are invalid, the order must be invalid. And so I don't think that there's anything to the order that continues to keep the unvaccinated healthcare workers out of the public healthcare system. And that, Laska, in answer to your question, that is where the Attorney General could intervene.
And so I'll just say the example because it was in your article very clearly. So the order, it says in her order in September of 22, so September of 22, she said an unvaccinated person is more likely to become infected than a vaccinated person and is more likely to transmit COVID-2 than a vaccinated person is. And this language still continues in her order. So nothing has changed over that period, versus anybody who's following the actual evidence out there knows that that is not the truth. And I mean, most people in general, I think, have come to their own conclusion that they've realized themselves, even if they've been vaccinated, they can transmit and get it. And so it's kind of humorous, because I think it was just 2 weeks ago, Dr. Bonnie was on TV once again, talking about why it's imperative healthcare workers must have 2 doses and supporting that idea of why they need the base 2 doses. And yet she's telling the general public, but you need to get boosted. Those 2 doses are no longer invalid. So it's, the arbitrator was on point to say that it's not adding up, because she's literally sending opposite information out from what's written down versus what she's telling the public.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct in your analysis.
And I also, something that I came across, so I never read Dr. Bonnie's book that she somehow managed to publish throughout the pandemic because she was so busy. But I did read some excerpts that were from her book. And she actually said in her book that, what did she say here? She said that I had a mandate and the legal authority to speak directly to the public about issues related to health. And I was fully aware that if I were widely offside with what the provincial health minister and government believed, it could make my position challenging. And that if I was too far off the mark too often, the government could render me ineffective or fire me. So she actually states even in her book that she's not necessarily providing, advice on health. She's providing advice based on what the provincial minister or provincial health minister and the government would like her to provide it, which I thought was, she laid it out. It's in her book. It's right there.
That's correct. So the provincial health officer may not make political orders. The provincial health officer's orders have to be bound up in a health reason. So if there was a really good health reason there, fine, then we would all have to live with that. But as this arbitrator has just demonstrated, there is no really good health reason there. There is quite an important case out of Alberta, which is why all these Alberta charges have fallen by the wayside. There's a case called Ingram, which is where the court found that the provincial health officer was consulting cabinet before she made her orders. Therefore, her orders were invalid. Now, to me, there's no question. I mean, we've all seen the health minister and Dr. Bonnie Henry out at every single meeting. There's no question that they work closely together. Now, I don't know if that has been challenged in a BC court, or because it is true that the minister always is quite careful to say these are Dr. Henry's orders. But if the order has no health basis, is it a political basis? Is that why it's been made? And if it's a political basis, it's not within the provincial health officer's authority.
Right. And I think the other point that we should point out too is that here's this person who is an unelected official making these decisions. So is she appointed by the premier? Is that correct?
Yeah, she's appointed by cabinet. I agree that I don't like it either. That is a legislative thing that should change. I think it's been there for a long time. So I don't fault anyone in the current situation with that, but it is a really bad system that the provincial health officer you just have to look at your screen at all the reams of orders and how many people can be in your room and who can come in your house and who can go see your granny and who has to wear masks. And there's hugely complicated orders just sort of changing like pieces on a checkers board every few weeks. That was in her authority, assuming there was a good basis for it. But you're right, it shouldn't be something that one independent individual decides. Those should be going to a cabinet, and they should be regulations, or they should be right in the legislature and properly debated.
And I think you mentioned that this isn't the case in other provinces. Like in Ontario, it's very different.
Yeah, so I have seen that. I can't give you an analysis, but it does appear that in Ontario, things were more in the hands of the government, but I can't really describe what that difference is.
Right. Okay.
All I can say is our BC legislation should change.
Okay. Yeah. So let's go back to the article. So we have this union, so the Teamsters Union. So it's an international union, and they took on a private sector employer, so Purolator. And as you've mentioned, they basically tore up Bonnie's rationalizations for her mandates. So then you have like our union, the BCGEU for some of us, and then the nurses union, the BCNU, and among others who haven't been willing to take on any of these rationalizations. And I wanted to point out that actually in my letter that I received from the union, they said that the regulation required me as a public servant to demonstrate my vaccination status from COVID-19 for employment. But because I chose not to do that, so I didn't disclose my status, then in turn, they're saying that I didn't follow the law, and for that reason was fired. And their job, they told me as a union, is to not determine about how right or wrong the law is, but rather who followed the law. And so in their mind, they said, the government followed the law. I didn't follow the law because I didn't disclose my status, and therefore their job is done. So that's essentially the rationalization they gave me as to why they're not bringing forward the case, because they said it's not their job. Meanwhile, I was saying to them that the law and the related case law was created on inaccurate information. So what you're saying is the government's allowed to create laws on inaccurate information, and that's fine. Meanwhile, I can be fired on inaccurate information. So that's kind of where it sort of left.
Yeah, well, I think you're right about that. I'm curious to know though, why did the Teamsters obviously keenly feel that it was important that they put forward such good evidence? They clearly spent money on it and time on it. Isn't that what a good self-respecting union will do? You guys have to explain this to me, because I never did labor law, and I was never, because I was a lawyer. You're in professional organizations, but you're not in unions. I don't know why any self-respecting union wouldn't stand up for its members. Isn't that what they're supposed to do? Give me the politics of that and why that works out that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear to me, it's just clearly a political response rather when it's just based on fact and it's their own politics tied up with the government. I don't know, Phil, if you have a comment on that, or Terry, it sounds like you'd want to jump in there.
Yeah, I want to jump in there a little bit, because the way I feel about it is I've met wonderful Teamsters members, and Teamsters is a wonderful union, but Teamsters is federal, right? So all of our BC unions, like our healthcare unions, our BCGEU, they're all corrupted by the BC government, is the way that I have felt about it. And I've been deep into the union. I was for my 17 years, and that's what I witnessed even at convention. You know, they were always telling us who to vote for, and everything was just always political, and I couldn't handle it, right? And that was actually why I was a steward with the union, is because I didn't trust the union. Because I felt like they were kind of owned by the government, right? And I always felt, because I used to attend the winter schools where all the unions, like all Canadian unions even, showed up there. And there were quite a few of the federal unions didn't seem so corrupted by it, right? So that's the way I feel about it. I don't know if anyone else has anything else to say about that, though.
I was a union. I've been a union guy pretty much my whole life, but I was like into trades and stuff like that, right? And then I got into HCU healthcare, and I was a laundry worker. Well, I'm going to try to share a video which should explain quite a bit. I don't know if it'll work or not, but just hopefully you're prepared for that. I wasn't going to do it, but I found the video pretty quick, and hopefully I'll be able to do that when it's. But yeah, the president. I have a half an hour conversation with her when all this stuff down. It's all recorded, and they are NDP. They're all the provincial executives love NDP. I was this close to becoming a provincial executive, and I got to go to the last convention when this all happened. They stopped it the year that COVID happened, and then they had a Zoom meeting the next following year, and then they had to have another convention the next year because it's every 2 years. And they didn't say anything about the unvaccinated, and they prepped up the NDP, and the president of the union right now, HEU, was and did run for the NDP.
So clearly there's a lot of back ties. So I don't know, Suzanne, if those inputs give you, I mean, it's all anecdotal of people's experience and observations, but I think there's definitely some work being done. I know, Suzanne, you were in touch with Corinne Maury. I know I follow her videos. For anyone not familiar, Corinne Maury has been a huge advocate for the fired nurses. She was a fired nurse herself, and she's very outspoken on YouTube, and they're digging deep into the basically the back end of things, and looking at actual like financials of these organizations, which has been really interesting. So I know that's a whole other tunnel of the discussion that I don't really want to go into, but what do you make of those comments, Suzanne?
Well, it is extremely interesting, and I'm perfectly happy to believe everything that you have all said, which is, I mean, it makes sense in a way. It makes sense and it doesn't make sense that they are too close to government, so they don't want to challenge them. It may be that they believe that government was doing the right thing too, but I just don't know how you can sustain that belief after this length of time. I don't know how realistic it is to go into the unions and take up some of the union positions, but it may be very difficult. I don't know what the politics are in terms of a political solution for you, which would be to have more authority within the union itself. That's the same with the government, though. I mean, I know last time I was on, Phil, I was talking about political solutions, and there's political solutions of all kinds, whether it's for the government or within the union, or and they're all challenging. However, if you can make them work, they can be very successful. I see there's another question there from Justin.
Yeah, Justin, I think you've been in touch actually with the unions. You've been doing that work, haven't you, Justin?
Yes, I have. So that we found strong evidence to suggest a very interesting financial relationship, like Jed was alluding to, between several of the major large trade unions here in British Columbia and the NDP party. And then one of the things that I just wanted to touch on here, as you were talking about, you know, the PHO officer and the labor laws and the different sections of the law. Well, jurisdiction is very, very important to us, right? So we've been stuck in a position where we are unable to access the justice system because we've been actively blocked by a union that is in a contractual obligation to with the employer to not bring a policy grievance forward. They've got an MOU with the employer stating that they will not bring a policy grievance forward. And it's very interesting because Section 54 of the Labor Code speaks very clearly about, you know, the altering the changing of the terms and conditions of employment and what that needs to trigger on behalf of, you know, a union having to go through a vote. We also have a provision in our collective agreement which says the same thing. I believe it's section 1.6 should the employer, because our employer is the government and they have the ability to do this, enact a regulation change or create a law that alters our conditions, our terms and conditions of employment, that it would immediately need to go to a vote from the membership. That never took place. So that's a breach of both contract and the Employment Act. And there's hundreds and hundreds of breaches, right? But it's very interesting, the relationship of deceit and willful obstruction of justice is, you know, perpetuated. And it's not just our particular union, it's all of them. They've all jumped in line. There are the outcasts like the you know, the Teamsters union, and they're large enough that they're not necessarily beholden to the NDP because they're a rather large trade union in the States. And I had a conversation with the Teamsters 2 years ago, and they were kind of shocked and on the outside of what the other unions were doing and how they were preventing their members from accessing the legal system. It's been very interesting, but you've got essentially criminal and civil offenses, miles long, on behalf of the employers, and like you said, the current sitting, and the past sitting attorney general are now premier, reasonably ought to have known these things at the time. So therefore, has he himself in that office perpetuated and aided and abetted to perpetuate said crimes, right? And jurisdiction is in, sorry, go ahead.
Well,
Please.
it's certainly true that nothing stood in his way, nor the opposition. My own political party, BC Liberals, did nothing. They didn't raise any objection. They worked closely with government all the way through. So everybody was, everybody was on the same side, except for those who weren't. And it was very difficult to make any progress against them for that reason. Justin, what union are you in?
So BCGEU. I'm
BCGEU,
a former public servant.
Yeah. Okay.
But Justin's been doing a lot of work on behalf of the group. So he's been digging into the stuff for, I think, several months, maybe years now.
Years.
Yeah. I do see there's other comments, but I don't want to fester on this one point. So we brought up politics a little bit, so I kind of want to stem into that. So Suzanne, you mentioned on your call with Phil, actually, that you said the best solution to all the things we've gone through is a political solution. And this year's a big year. It's BC's next provincial general election. It's going to be happening in the fall. So just to get some comments, how important is this election for our future as a province?
Well, so let's go back to the healthcare side of things. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways I could answer that, but I'll stick to the things that we're really talking more about here. I would like to see candidates who stand up and say, look, we went way too far on this. I'd like to hear from candidates that they are willing to take back everybody with the seniority that they should have had. Now, of course, there could be a massive bill there for taxpayers of British Columbia. They're compensating all the people who are improperly fired. But and I'd like to see that new Health Professions Act canceled, or
Bill 36. Yeah.
Bill 36, because that is going to be extremely damaging to people. That one of the things that, and I think I have a theory, which is that the reason they're so keen on keeping the vax mandates is because they want the authority to do that through that new Health Professions Act, and they want to have that continuing authority to say you will take this vaccine.
Right.
And also the other authority that is given in that act is that every single college now, whatever your profession is, your college will be tied to government. There's no independence anymore. So all those kinds of things are, and then just candidates who stand up for people's personal freedoms, that don't believe that government needs to control everything and everybody. And if we have any time at all to talk about the truckers case today, we can talk about that, because there were some very nice personal freedoms things in there. Maybe not as strong as I might have liked them, but there were some in there. It was finally a judge in this country said that there were some charter rights that were worth upholding. So I think it's those kinds of things you could look for. You should look for in your local candidates. Go talk to them all. Go to some of the public meetings. Ask hard questions. Don't ask questions that they can just answer by mundane answers, but ask questions that are meaningful and see who answers them and what they have to say.
Yeah, I mean, all of that is important. And so it's important that you do your due diligence and actively listening and not just looking at the Coles notes of the newsletters you get sent in the mail. I always tell people, don't read those newsletters. Instead, Google online. It's very easy how your MLA or MP is voting. That's what I tend to do. So I look and see what decisions they were voting towards, because those newsletters, they're very vague and broad, and they don't actually touch on the hard issues versus when you actually see how these people are voting. And so they might say one thing in a newsletter, but then vote a very different way. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the other politics that most of you are engaged in is union politics. And I don't know if it's futile to try and get on a union executive, but boy, that would be a game changer if you could have some of those have some say in what some of those union decisions are.
Yeah, I know that Corinne Maury was really encouraging the members who were still members of the nurses union when there was a recent election. She sort of gave her 2 cents, I know, about which people she thought were actually going to do a good job, and encouraging people again to look into it and do their research. But yes, I know I saw somebody put a comment about the Conservatives here in BC. So we've seen a huge uptick in Conservative supporters, something we haven't seen in this province in a long time. So do you have any comments on the party, what we're seeing? Do you think that a Conservative government is the solution to a lot of our problems? I mean, hearing what, they're saying, they definitely want to bring back healthcare workers, fire Bonnie, get rid of Bill 36. But do you have any comments on that?
Well, I don't want to take a partisan approach here, because I think all of you can and should make up your own minds on these things. But I will say that the Conservatives are the only ones that are saying something quite different on the healthcare side. Now that I think the BC United, formerly BC Liberals, are starting to pull away from what the NDP have done, but they were very hand in hand. When the vax mandates came down, there was no objection to them from the BC Liberal opposition. And and in fact, Kevin Falcon tweeted practically the same day saying, I support vaccine mandates. I personally was horrified by the vaccine mandates. In fact, I think I was horrified with just about everything that came in, because it was such overreach. It was such overreach in terms of breaching people's liberties. And that's certainly what I'm interested in a candidate and in a party. Are they going to back off and let people live their lives and give people good information and allow them to make their own decisions?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say, in terms of your question, that the Conservatives are the only ones who are saying something different from the other two in that regard.
But you are right. The former Liberals now in BC United are definitely changing their tone a bit. And we even saw that today in regards to the Emergencies Act. We see Janmeet Singh immediately tweet, well, the NDPs reluctantly voted for the It's like,
what a pile of baloney.
Now we're backpedaling. So let's get into, let's talk about this historic ruling today. So judges rule Emergency Act use was illegal. So what do you make of this? Like you said in the intro, it's definitely this swinging pendulum that's now looking to the other side. What do you want to say on that?
Well, what I will say is that the Charter of Rights has been so ignored in the last 2.5 years, 3 years, and it's been very, very dispiriting. I'm trying to write a chapter in a book that someone is writing, and I was looking back at some of the old cases. There's one called Baudouin, or I forget the name of it. Anyway, it's the religious freedom one. And the judge says, yes, there was a breach of their religious freedom, but there, Dr. Henry had the welfare of the province in her heart, and that's all that matters. And that was pretty much the tone of a lot of the decisions in the early days. Almost no consideration for weighing the evidence, even having evidence to weigh, and coming to a different decision. So the truckers case today, it was really fabulous to see. I got to say, I follow these things on Twitter, especially if I have a few hours at my desk, and Twitter was burning up with enthusiasm of people who were so happy to have seen that happen. What the judge did was he said two things. First of all, that there never should have been a state of emergency declared, that the circumstances for it, which are set out in statute, were not met. And then the second thing he said was that there were two major charter breaches. Now, there's no remedy because it was just really a declaration. Yes, this was a breach of the charter. One was the freedom of, sorry, I just can't remember what section it was. But anyway, what they purported to do was say that people couldn't protest anymore. That was a breach of the charter. And the second one, the thing that was so egregious, and you will all remember, 2B, Justin, thank you. Yes, 2B and 8. The egregious thing the government did was freezing people's bank accounts. And the judge agreed that was a breach of people's right to search and seizure. And he's absolutely right that it was. That was, to me, of all that whole truckers thing, that was the worst. And that's why we all have to be very careful about not agreeing that digital currency would be a fine idea, because anyone could be cut off at any time. But that was really, really egregious. Can you imagine you've got one member of the family in Ottawa with the truck and protesting as they're entitled to do, and the rest of the family can't even pay with a credit card or get food to eat because the bank account's frozen? It's just despicable. And so the court found that today, and I was really happy to see that.
Yeah, I had this moment. I don't know we have members all over the province, but I remember it was a very dark time in, I think it was January of 2022, and the Honorable Brian Peckford was speaking, and I was one of the lucky people who got to go into this little church when you weren't supposed to and listen to him speak and talk about the history of Canada. And for those of you who don't know, Brian Peckford is the last living author who helped design the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So he really does have the voice on this document, and he's just been so ignored. He's been just slapped again and again in the media as being anti this. And, you know, I'm sure today he probably felt really good that finally someone took knowledge of the words that are laid out in that document. But it was such a special moment just to see him talk about it, and just know that thankfully these people like him had this foresight to create this document, because otherwise we wouldn't have anything like that to protect us.
Yeah, and what that reminds me of, Laska, is that the third thing the judge did was he said that this was not moot. Because the case you're talking about, the no-fly case, the federal government said, oh, well, we're all finished with this now, walked into court and said, well, therefore it's moot, court, you shouldn't hear it. And the court agreed, which was disgraceful. But in this case today, the trucker case, he said, well, I could find it's moot, but I'm not going to, because I think it's too important.
Yeah, it was like everyone sort of said on this call. I do feel like a sense of new energy and spirit with the way we're seeing things turn, and that's why it is important we keep this fight up and keep these discussions going, because it is changing, and finally, at long last, we are getting our voice out there. It's just taken a long time.
Yeah, I think so. Someone just asked about the Canadian Bill of Rights. We don't really talk about the Canadian Bill of Rights anymore, and I can't give you any analysis of that. I just don't have an answer. It's just that we do seem to talk about the Charter, and the Bill of Rights is really pretty much receded into the background.
So, Suzanne, do you have any other comments you sort of want to shed light on? I do want to give Terry and Jed an opportunity just sort of to speak about their organization, and then for everybody else, we are going to have a Q&A specifically on questions focused on the discussion this evening. So if you do have Qs, either you can put your hand up or put them in the chat and we will get to them. But do you have any remarks you just want to make before I let Terry and Jed have a little chat time?
Alaska, someone just asked about the appeal, and Phil, yeah, you're right. It could go a long time. It would go to the Federal Court of Appeal and then to the Supreme Court of Canada if it keeps going. I was kind of disgusted in the fact that the politicians weighed in and saying, yes, we're going to appeal it before they could possibly even had time to look at it. You've got to let your lawyers have a look at it. The right answer for them would have been, we are going to analyze it and I'll get back to you in a few days. That would have been the right answer.
So it's essentially a long process.
A long process.
Yeah. Okay, Terry or Jed, I don't know who wants to go first, but why don't you tell us a little bit about United Healthcare Workers?
How much time do I got? I kind of want to start off with like myself, a little bit like how I was into the union and stuff like that. I could try to make it as short as, what do I got, like 8 minutes or something, 10 minutes?
Yeah, we'll just take a couple minutes and give
Jed,
the people...
let's keep it till like 3 minutes.
Not really. I would really like to show this video because this video shows me kind of like where I worked, and it was right before.
I think the videos are kind of tough though, Jed. Just there's always sound issues, so maybe we'll have to. Maybe it's something we could share with the members through an email.
Okay.
So why don't you just focus on you and United Healthcare Workers, because you guys have an important message to share.
Okay. So I've, like I was saying before, I've been in the union for a long time. 7 years. I was the chairperson of my local for 4. The co-chair of the OH&S, and chief shop steward. I was involved with everything, right? Labor Council. I was on the Labor Council for a bunch of years, second vice president on that too, of the Comox Courtney Labor Council. And yeah, so that's pretty much just a short version of that. The society started probably about almost 2 years now. It's probably started probably about just about almost 2 years now, getting close to 2 years. We're going to have our AGM here coming up in June, but we were kind of working on it before, and I was looking for something for the longest time when this happened, and it ended up happening. And I met up with Terry, and so many other great people. I'm just happy that it's just finally starting to roll. And we filed our lawsuit against Bonnie Henry in October. Great. This pretty much the same day that we were terminated, like the anniversary. So it was kind of a good gift to give away, right? I thought that was pretty good. And the lawyer said he went and dropped it down there personally, right to him. So that's for all healthcare workers. And it doesn't matter if you're vaccinated. It's actually, you can go read it on United Health or unitedtogether.ca. And it's pretty much, it's about a breach of contract. So and we're the same thing. We're the same thing as BCPS. We want bodily autonomy. We want all this stuff, and we don't want to have, we want choice to take stuff if you want to take it or not, right? That's the way it has to be. And yeah, so we're super proud that we got that out. The class action is just sign up for now. We have to get certified still too, so we're going through the same thing with BCPS. I think we might have filed just before BCPS.
Yeah.
And we're kind of for the membership. You can join up. I'll maybe let Terry talk a little bit about that maybe, but we're focusing on Section 12s. So we're just a little bit, we wouldn't even be here if it wasn't BCPS, really. So we thank you guys from the bottom of our hearts. We really do. And we're focusing on Article 19 in the Constitution. So I really want to go after the unions. Like that's something that's like, I was involved. I almost feel like I was indoctrinated. They had Jagmeet Singh. They had John Horgan show up there at conventions. They had Adrian Dix there. They had all these people there, right? So there's no doubt that, and it's not supposed to be. Unions aren't supposed to be for government, but we all know that that's kind of the way it is, right? The NDP they pick union guys to come in and do all the jobs for all their buildings and stuff like that, right? So that's kind of what we're focusing on right now. Section 12, Article 19, our lawsuits filed. We're going to hear about that. We're going to be doing some fundraising. We do have you can look up the lawsuit right on the website, unitedtogether.ca. And yeah, I don't know if you want to carry on from that, Terry. Anything you want to add?
I just wanted to add a couple of things. Just so we're waiting for certification right now. So we're working kind of as a group because our HEU members, their grievances are getting dropped. So the union's trying to drop them as members. They're trying to drop their grievances and get rid of them. So we're trying to help our members with appealing those and that sort of thing, because it's hard to navigate all of that. We're also still intaking members. It's word of mouth. I was in the chat there. Philip was also talking with some of their members. It seems to be really hard to reach out to everyone. So the big thing is getting the word out. We need to try to access as many people as we can so that they can join the class action lawsuit, right? We have about 175 members now. And more have joined just the class action part of it. But in our society, we have about 175 members now. I think that's pretty much it, Jed. Like Jed said, we're so happy that we're working sort of, beside your guys' group. You have given us so much advice and everything, right? We're healthcare workers. You guys are public servants. You guys seem to know the system much better than we do, right? So it's just been amazing. And we've been working with you guys since 2 years ago now. So it's awesome. Just wanted to say thank you for that.
Yeah, it would have been really, really nice if there was a nice big nurses group, right? So at first we couldn't take in the nurses, but now we can take in all healthcare workers. It was just going to be about us, just the people that signed up to our society. But now we've opened the door for all healthcare workers. So unionized healthcare workers, sorry. Like
Yeah.
that's just because of the what the lawsuit is, right? So
if you guys maybe just plunk your if you don't mind plunking your email address, or not email, but your website into the chat. So just for anybody else on the call, if you have friends or colleagues or family, or of people who were fired or even who took early retirement, same case scenario, right? If they were affected by the mandates and they were in the healthcare in BC, reach out to unitedtogether.ca and join their group, because then you can be part of their actions that they're taking.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I do want to add, just on the website, it shows like most frequently asked questions. It says it has all that stuff in there. You can go, it's almost the very first button that you can push. You can read the lawsuit right there. It's for public. It's for everyone to see.
Laska, sorry for adding some more here. I think I'm speaking on behalf of both of our societies here. Is our original plan was to go after the unions. That's what we were going to do, right? I see lots of talk in the chat and stuff, and that was originally what our plans were. But what the problem is, and we've sort of explained to Suzanne here, is the unions are doing a really good job of pretending that they're representing us, right? So we haven't been able to, like, the labor board won't let us through. No one will let us through to sue the unions because they're pretending that they're representing us. So this is why we had to find another avenue to go after for now. But this is the thing is, I think that with our societies formed now and our membership excited about it, eventually we might be able to go after the unions as well, right?
That's literally that's what it was for me right in the beginning. And I'm not going to give up. Like, I mean, I have evidence for over 2 years of conversations recorded, emails. I mean, I have no doubt. And if not, then whatever, I have to share it to the world. So it's just waiting for that time to do it, right?
Well, thank you, Terry and Jed, for being here and being part of the discussion tonight. And I know you guys are just two grassroots people. You said earlier on, you don't like being in the spotlight, but you're doing a fantastic job. So thanks for being here tonight. And then Phil, was John here on the call?
Not sure where to start, but will tell you that as of January 31st, our union has completely ceased to help us. They had an arbitration, and the arbitrator agreed that us being terminated was okay. And so the union sent out a letter, pithy little letter, saying basically, if you want to come back to work for BC Ambulance, not in your original position, but to rehire with BC Ambulance at the very bottom, then you get 2 doses of the vaccine and then you can reapply. So let me put that into a context. This is a little difficult in 2 minutes, but I'll do the best I can. To be a paramedic in British Columbia, I've been a paramedic for 32 years. I've attended 26,000 ambulance calls in that time. I've taught more students as a paramedic instructor than any other instructor in the province at the time that I was terminated. I never divulged my vaccine status. I stood on the contract. I was a shop steward for years, so I know how the contract works, and there's nothing in the contract that says that it's legal for me to be laid off without pay, to have a vaccination, or to be terminated, all of which they did in contradiction of our collective agreement. And in fact, the PHO order said cannot continue to work. We should have been laid off if they wanted to obey the letter of the so-called PHO order, but our management went farther. I think it's UHCWBC. They went farther and they terminated us. Now, I'm not sure how those decisions were made, but they were the wrong decisions. At the time they terminated us, we were desperate for paramedics all across our province. I'll state emphatically that people have died all across our province. There have been countless deaths because there's been no ambulance. In order to be a paramedic in BC, you have to hire part-time. You take your paramedic training, which you pay for yourself, and then you work in communities like Tofino, UQLIT, et cetera, et cetera. little tiny communities all across BC. And when you build up enough seniority, eventually you go to Vancouver. Then you work there for 4, 5, 7, or 10 years, and you finally get enough seniority to post somewhere out in the province. So by the time you're a full-time paramedic in your own community, you finally got back to your own community, you've invested at least 20 years in the service. So to offer to hire us back means they're offering you to go back on a $2 an hour pager and sit in some community like Port Renfrew or Spuzzum, BC, and sit there with a pager and do that 8 shifts a month until 10 years later you get enough seniority to go to Vancouver. Then you leave your family, you go there for 4.5 years like I did, and then you finally get a posting out of there. So they're not offering you a job back. They're offering you to be part of the system to try and help out. I'll also point out something is after they terminated all of us, they already had a staffing problem that was acute and dangerous, but they weren't dealing with that. But once they fired more than 85 of us, the union has stated 85, but it is more than that. In our group, we have 51. We've captured 51 of those people, but there are way more. And it doesn't even address the people that retired rather than face this. Those people usually work, they retire from full-time, but then they continue to work for the next 10 to 15 years. And they have resources in communities all across the province. So that resource was lost. That's hundreds of people, paramedics. But if just the 85 that were fired went back to work, that provides 40 ambulances on the street immediately. If they paired up with another partner at a station where that station doesn't have a partner, there's nobody to man that, we call them cars, man that car, then you have the potential for putting 85 ambulances back into service across the province, if you can see the math of that. So after they fired us, they were really desperate. And to use an example from Vancouver Island, because we have some documents regarding the people involved in this, the fire pagers would go off at the various volunteer fire halls who have just enough people to man a fire response in an emergency or an emergency vehicle extrication response in that community. I'll pick a community, let's say Sayward, BC, or somewhere like that. They have a little fire department, just enough people volunteering and being available. If you roll your car over and you're trapped with your family, they're going to come out and rescue you and assist in that EMS response. They're not paramedics. They're not there to be paramedics. They're there to protect your house from burning down and assist in a fire response. So what was happening is their pages would go off after we've been terminated, and it would say fire assist BC ambulance. So they would go to the BC ambulance station. They'd find one paramedic standing there who has no partner. That person can't do a call by themselves. So they would get in and drive the ambulance and participating in attending to patients. These are unvaccinated firefighters now doing the job of paramedics who were fired because they refused to declare their vaccine status. And this has gone on all across this province. We have 2 cases that we have every piece of documentation on. But and ironically, one of the firefighters that brought this to our attention at the beginning was just terminated last week. He's a paramedic with the ambulance service, but he volunteers for the fire department. And so on his spare time to help his community. So he was off for an injury. So he just got better from his injury and was deemed to be able to go back to work. So they terminated him last week. We're still terminating paramedics in BC every other couple of weeks. I just dealt with another one a couple of weeks ago who was terminated after being off for a mental health injury and something else. And so he came back to work and they deemed him fit to work. His first day at work, he's terminated. So this is still going on. In other provinces, this has been stopped. Some people were laid off. I interviewed some of the firefighters in Richmond, BC, and they were telling me that some of their guys just took time off and were laid off for a while, did other jobs, etc., and then they got hired back. But that's not the case for us. So as of the 31st of January, we've been just sent out a letter, and they're apparently resending it out this week, stating that unless you get 2 vaccinations, even in light of all of the information that we have, that this is pointless, unless you get 2 vaccinations, then there'll be no further action on behalf of the union and no more contact. And the day we were terminated, they cut us off and they have not communicated with us since at all whatsoever. We've had no contact. We were cut off from all contact with the union web pages, and they aligned themselves with the decision. And in fact, I was watching the video again today where the union president stated, "We have better things to do this year because they're restructuring and redoing their agreement, the collective agreement with the management and the government. So they said, we have better things to do this year than deal with just 85 paramedics who lost their jobs," end quote. That was on a CBC interview. And I just spent an hour on the phone today with the president of the Windsor Paramedics, who just got reinstated back to their jobs. And I watched his first public interview where he said, we will fight this tooth and nail. We will not stop until we see these people reinstated back to their jobs. And they've just been reinstated. Our union just sat back and said, we want to see everybody vaccinated. And we agree with this. And we've all been terminated.
Yes. And I mean, there's just a comment here that says, I'm sure the greater BC population has no idea this is occurring. And you're right. I even still had no idea that paramedics were still getting fired. But it's great that you have this organization and that action is being taken. And we really just want to thank you for being here tonight and for sharing your story. And thank you for all the service you've done. I had no idea it took that long to get a posting somewhere in your own community. So I think a lot of us can appreciate that process a little more, especially the next time we see an ambulance go by, and that it really takes something to get your position. So thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to our audience. So thank you everyone for bearing with us. We're going to try and finish at 8:30, but we'll just kind of see how the questions go. So if you do have a question about the discussion this evening, please put up your hand. Just a reminder, the questions are just about the discussion. If you have questions related to legal actions, either contact the society through the email, or as Phil mentioned, we are having an AGM next month. And so you're welcome to bring your questions then. But in the meantime, let's get started. So Chester, I'll start with you.
Hello, thank you very much for taking the time to hear me today. So one of my concerns arose from my GAC appeal hearing. So it's the Grievance Appeal Committee hearing that I was involved in for BCGEU. And during that hearing, I put forth a really good rebuttal for the case that my air quotes union representative used to validate his letter. And long story short, when I brought up the glass case, they said that he agreed that the employer did a terrible job at bringing their case, and that the union did a great job at bringing their case, and that's why Purolator was successful, or Teamsters was successful in that case. My union representative then went on to talk to the director, who was in the room as well, performing the hearing or whatever his role was, and he said that BCGEU would have to challenge the regulation in BC that's preventing arbitration or whatever, and that the regulatory body would be a far harder adversary than just simply whatever the ruling was out of Ontario. Meaning he referenced something that we would have to actually get Bonnie Henry cited in the court case and all of this. But so he was basically saying that it would be too hard for the union to go up against such a sophisticated adversary. It was one of the words that he used. But what I don't understand is I understand that the ruling is out of Ontario, and I understand that there's different regulatory bodies out there. But should that glass case not be the smoking gun for all of us to show that it was wrong what was done to those Purolator people? And here's why. And it had all this beautiful evidence put out there, and it was a nice little package for Nicholas Glass to tell all of us and vindicate all of us. But because we worked for the government, we're excluded from any sort of retribution from those sorts of things, because it was law at the time for all of us to be fired. But then the union is just saying oh, well, it's too sophisticated of an adversary to go up against. But then that right there is saying that they never intended to.
Do you want me to try and answer that, Chester? I don't believe that to be true. I think that the Purolator is a big organization. They had lots of money. They had lots of resources. They fought the good fight. But their expert was found to not be as good as the expert that the union had called. And they were simply put in front of the arbitrator, such a persuasive piece of evidence that the arbitrator went along with it. And he was driven to that decision. And I think the niceties of how you get there, you'll probably know more about that than I do, because I think you are all facing that additional extra challenge that to go in through the union is hard, especially if the union is not playing along. But if a union were to be determined, any union in British Columbia were to be determined in the same way the Teamsters were, and to bring forward the same kind of evidence, I don't believe that the government couldn't be. I don't believe that their evidence is a big wall that you can't get through. I just don't believe that. I think that the evidence on the side of these mandates no longer being valid, I think is extremely compelling.
Mhm.
Precisely, and I agree. And so that's why I wonder.
It was, and by the way, it was a Vancouver arbitrator. And it was actually brought out of Prince George for some reason. But it is a Canadian Labor Code one. But I don't know that makes any difference as a practical matter.
Yeah, it just seems like semantics at this point, because how is Teamsters being victorious against Purolator for the exact same scenario that all of us are going for, but we just work for the government instead and have a union that doesn't want to represent us, but therefore I just don't understand how the province of British Columbia is going to defend themselves when the evidence that they get from Bonnie Henry and all the other doctors or whatever are going to reflect the exact same evidence that was brought forth in the Glass case.
Yeah,
so
I agree. But I might suggest, there's a couple more questions there, and we are going to run out of time here because I have to go. I have to go.
So thanks, Chester. I think the quick answer to that is they know that, and they're just going to delay it as much as they can. They've dug themselves in deep, and that's kind of their goal, is just to delay it with procedures and lawyers.
Right.
Okay, Catherine, you've had your hand up for some time. Please ask your question.
Great. Thank you so much. My question has to do with Bill 36, the Health Professions and Occupations Act. It is now law, and we're talking about trying to bring in another government. I'm wondering, well, there's two parts to this. The law, I mean, this act is absolutely terrible and tyrannical. And when people are with professional associations such as the Counseling Therapy Association, there are definitely conflicting values with that to do with confidentiality and ethics and stuff. So one is the associations almost seem as bad as unions in terms of becoming aligned with this act. So how does one challenge their association? I don't know who to ask, or if there's a lawyer. And the other thing is how difficult is it to change this act? It's now law.
Yes, that's a political question. You'd need a change of government.
Mm-hmm.
I think both the BC United and the Conservatives have stated publicly that they want to change it. I've certainly heard Kevin Falcon, who's the leader of the opposition, saying that he's not in support of it. And I know that John Rustad, Conservative leader, is also not in support of it. Mm-hmm. But it needs a change of government because obviously the BC NDP government like it. So yes. I think that's the only way it really will get changed.
And one other point I'll just add is in December, there was the judicial review with Dr. Bonnie around her orders and whether or not they're still valid. Two doctors and a nurse psychologist brought forward this petition. There was, I think, a 10-day judicial review. It was very silent. You couldn't really read about it anywhere, where, several questions were asked to Bonnie about it. And so there's that decision that's still pending judgment because the judge, of course, reserved judgment. So that could be something, too, that could change or affect that bill because he could say there was no longer these mandates are no longer valid, and that could have an impact. So there are a lot of other moving pieces with other suits that are currently happening in the province. Justin.
Thank you. I was just curious what your analysis was for the Purolator case. What are the shortcomings and what are the wins?
Well, I think it's a fantastic case. The shortcoming is that it's an arbitration, not a court case, and courts are not at all bound by it. But my argument is that the evidence is so compelling that a court hearing evidence of a similar quality would come to the same decision. So they wouldn't follow the case, but they would follow the logic.
In specific to the ruling of the back pay piece, care to take maybe without looking at it, it's difficult, but just in general thoughts, like I have some thoughts reading that compared to previous or arbitration cases and other case law, but just what are your thoughts on say the justification for the policy, the justification for, bringing these individuals back after that certain period of time, like, the efficacy is no longer there after June. I can't remember the date.
Yeah, June of 2022. Yeah, so he ordered pay. They were off work for another 10 months. The arbitrator awarded compensation. I think they're probably all sitting in a back room now trying to figure out what that compensation should be. So we don't know any numbers, but it has been ordered for them. If these kinds of cases would be solved or resolved in a similar way in British Columbia, it would be a massive bill to the taxpayers of British Columbia. But people have been unfairly out of work, and that's the remedy.
Mm-hmm. Do
you think of how much money all of you have foregone in your salaries? It's a very large number.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I would just concur that, like, my personal opinion is that's the largest reason they haven't brought back the healthcare workers, right? For example, the provincial health officer cited, the federal Ministry of Health and, the federal health officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, the World Health Organization, etc., in the reasoning behind enacting the mandate, yet hung on to their mandate, even for public servants like ourselves, a year after the federal government had dropped mandates for their own staff. And so one of the key things that I took away from the Purolator case was the argument for the continuing need to justify on behalf of the employer the necessity of maintaining the policy, and that it should be tested versus KVP and Irving at regular intervals, right?
Yeah, that was an important thing that he said. That's absolutely right. He said, and particularly because Purolator is a sophisticated organization, like all of your unions and employers are, if once they had made the decision to fire people or to lay people off, they had to keep monitoring. And when the advice changed, they had to change their minds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then another, and then I'll relinquish the floor here, but another observation that I've got is jurisdiction, right? So jurisdiction is totally key, not only for ourselves, but for healthcare workers, civil servants, whether they're in a municipality or a regional district or a private company, like Purolator, right? So it's all about where the jurisdiction comes down the pipe. For Purolator, which is a private company, they state citing, the federal government, like we had spoke about previously, and then of course they had been maintaining that past the federal government's own mandate. Therefore, it didn't bode well for them in the maintenance of their policy. When you look at a regional district or municipality, many of them have relinquished, not all of them, but many of them have relinquished their mandates even a year prior to the provincial government as well, right? And many of them, like I believe, oh my goodness, I don't know if it was New Westminster, there was Richmond, City of Richmond, they received I think 50% back pay, almost, as an incentive to not sue, right, on their way back, because they did not have an order from the provincial government or the provincial health officer, right? And then one of the common misconceptions is, especially for healthcare with jurisdiction, is that the provincial health officer is the individual that has made these, I guess, employment orders, right? So everyone figures that they're no longer able to work in their vocation, and they were terminated because of a PHO order. Well, that's not true. A PHO order is a temporary emergency measure, and it must be repealed when the emergency measure is relinquished, right? Everything needs to go back. So, for healthcare, for example, like you've got the orders, right, which are specifically for acute care and for care aides, right, which it says that they cannot work in that vocation. It doesn't say that they must be terminated or they can't work, right?
Yeah.
And then so
that's another
employees,
element. Yeah, that's another element to it, and I've never quite got my mind around that, because the provincial health officer has ordered you must have the vaccines, but it is actually the individual health districts who have chosen to fire people.
yes, and it's policy, right? So that's the point, right? I know it's rather complicated, and I don't need to waste your time with that, but the point is that it's done by virtue of policy, right? So exactly the same as with, the public service agency, right? So there's the guise and the posturing of a health and safety policy, but we have evidence that proves otherwise. And then of course it's done by means of a regulation change under the Public Service Act, and then of course the HR policy 25.
Okay,
right,
Justin, I just kind of need to cut off because this
Yeah,
is.
I'm good.
I know we're getting deep into it, and we could talk about this stuff, but thank you for the question. So we are over 8:30. I do want to be respectful of people's time. So are there any closing? James, do you have a quick question for Suzanne?
Sorry, no, it wasn't for Suzanne. It was for Phil.
Okay. Terry and Jed, I see you both have your hands up. We would like to close out this meeting and just thank our guest speakers.
Super quick.
Okay.
Super quick. I was just wondering if you're going to write something, or is there something you could write to our unions to give them some common sense to look at some data? That's it.
I don't think they would be paying too much attention to that. But you've got lawyers, and lawyers, of course, are costly, but they'll be doing that.
Terry, did you have anything you just wanted to quickly add?
Do you know what, you guys? I actually raised my hand for Katie, and I think it was a quick question. For
okay.
Suzanne. She didn't know how to raise her hand. Sorry, Katie, are you able to talk?
Yes, I just unmuted myself. I'm just curious, Suzanne, if you've been following the judicial review that took place in Vancouver in November, December last year.
Is this the one with Peter Gall and the doctors? That one?
Yeah, and there was, I think there was two or three different sort of reviews going on at the same time. Yeah,
I've been following it somewhat. I know Peter Gall, and I've said, let's go have lunch, and we've agreed to have lunch, except we haven't done it. So I don't have all the details from it. They actually sent me all their materials as well, and I just haven't had a chance to look at them. So it'll be interesting, and they are going to use arbitrator Glass's decision. However, I think most of their evidence is already in, so I don't quite know how that will play out.
Okay, so I'm going to cut it off there. Suzanne, thank you once again for being with us, just for your ongoing commentary in the public. And clearly you're assisting a lot of these groups, organizations with review of their documents. And so, we really appreciate that you are bringing some common sense to these situations and just being a very public advocate for justice and for evidence-based decisions, which has clearly been lacking in our society over the last couple of years. Who knew? So Phil, did you have anything you wanted to say, or can I just close it out? All right, so thank you everybody once again to our other guests, United Healthcare Workers, Terry and Jed. Again, you can look them up at United Healthcare Workers. And then also John, thank you so much for sharing your story. John, you can learn more about the paramedics at bcpu.ca, and we look forward to seeing you all at the AGM next month. So thanks very much, everyone.